Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you guys are not sleeping. Yep. Thank you very much for showing up, and thanks to DrupalSouth community to give me opportunity to present here. I'm going to talk about the Drupal Ajax framework. So, a little bit about me. My name is Mahesh, and I work for an awesome company called Citizen Technology. And so those who are wondering what is the Srijan mean, the Srijan is actually Sanskrit word which means the creation. I'm working with Drupal from Drupal 6, 7 and now Drupal 8. And so I also like working with CSS and JavaScript. And these days I'm making stuff with React because all the cool kids in the market are making things with the React. My Twitter handler is Mutant Mahesh. You can connect me with on Twitter, and my D.O name is Sankhala. The agenda of this session is that I'm going to talk about what is the Drupal Ajax framework and what is the difference between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 Ajax framework, because it's better to compare and then we can understand it well. And what are the Drupal Ajax callback commands, and how you can create your own custom callback commands. Drupal provides lots of built-in Ajax commands, so which should be sufficient for in the most of the cases, but sometimes you may want to create your own custom commands. So I will show you how you can do that. Okay, so in the normal Ajax workflow, so first of all that Ajax, most of you know that what is the Ajax, but so those who don't know, Ajax is the a way to update the portion of the page without reloading the whole page. So when user interact with the page, so user can click on a link or submit a button or just select something in the options, and then you don't want to refresh whole the page, but you just want to update a section of the page. So it will make a request to the server behind the scene, and when the response come back, it will update the portion of a page. So with the Ajax framework is the normal workflow that browser sends the request to the server, and when it gets the response, it's going to pass that response, and then it's going to invoke the functions like JavaScript functions. And then if something is required, like modifying the DOM or updating the styling of some component, so it's going to do that. But the problem with this workflow is that it's a repetitive task. So if you're building something on your own, then you need to do everything each time when you make a request. So you need to prepare an Ajax request object, like what is the options for the Ajax request object. Is going to be a get request or a put request, and what are the data which you're going to send to the server. Okay, and after processing, when you receive the request on the server, you're going to process the data, and then you need to decide what is the format which I need to send, whether it's going to be XML or JSON. And if it's XML or JSON, then you need to decide what all the fields this should be in the response, right? And if you're returning the HTML, then you need to take care of the proper encoding of the HTML character so it does not break. And when you receive the response, you need to pass that response and create a JavaScript object, and then access all the data which you need. And finally, then you're going to modify the DOM based on the data, whether you want to append that existing, append this response which you got, or you just delete something on the page, or show you hide something on a page. So the Ajax framework which Drupal provides, it actually simplifies these things. So it's provides a simplifies and standardized way of doing things. So you don't need to worry that how to create an object of XML HTTP request or Ajax request object, and then get the data and pass that data to object. But Drupal provides a simple API for that. So it's provides a simple API to how you can attach Ajax behavior to any element on a page, and that's going to make the Ajax request based on the configuration of that behavior of that Ajax object. Okay, so it provides a standard way of returning a response. So you don't need to worry that when you get a request, how you're going to create a response and what should be the format which you should return. So it's provide a unique, unified way of responding to the Ajax request. And so the Ajax framework has actually two things, like it's considered the client-side code and the server-side code. Okay, so the client-side code is mostly everything is inside that Drupal.ajax, which is basically a wrapper around the jQuery.ajax object. but when you manually make or create a jQuery Ajax object, you need to provide the path and then the data and the request method and anything which is required. But Drupal.ajax object does that for you. So, and this basically takes the 3 arguments, which is the base, element, and element setting. So base is just a ID of that element, and the element is actually the DOM representation of that element, and the element setting is that all the options which you want to set for the Ajax request. So like what is the path and what should be the method of the request, and it has all these default options. Like, so by default it's going to always make a request to the system/Ajax path if you don't specify, and the default events, the what should be the event. So if it's a mouse, mostly it's a mouse down, but for the select list it can be a change, or for the text field it can be like focus or more change. And so it has all these default options, like and the selector, like to which element I need to attach this Ajax object, and it has a speed, methods, and all these default options. But when you create a Drupal.ajax object, you don't need to provide all these options because all these are set by default. Only you need to provide the ID and where you want to attach this object. So another part of the client-side code is that it's a JavaScript function under this object, like Drupal Ajax prototype.commands. So this is a namespace for all the commands which are provided by Drupal. Okay, and this actually, and each of the command takes the 3 arguments. So like Ajax, response, and status. So Ajax is actually the representation of the triggering element and the information about the request, and the response is what you get the response from the server, and the status is the HTTP status code, so that you can decide whether the request was successful or not. So here you can see that all the Ajax commands which are provided by Drupal is inside the MISC directory ajax.js file. So all the Ajax framework code is inside this file, and it has this Drupal.ajax, that prototype.commands. So all the commands, each command is a function inside this namespace of the object. So for example, you can see it's showing that remove. Remove is a function which is going to be invoked when you get the response from the server. But the server need to tell that this is the command which I need to invoke, which I'll show you how you will do that. From the server side, you don't need to create the JSON object manually and then pass it. All you need to do is that there should be a callback. So inside the PHP is a PHP function which actually return the associative array, and this associative array should have at least one key that is called command, and which this command key represent the function inside the Drupal.ajax.prototype.commands namespace. Okay, so here you can see, and the other elements of that array is like the data which you want to pass to this function. So here these are the 2 Ajax command which are inside the include.ajax.inc file. So these are the 2 commands, Ajax command remove and Ajax command append. So you can see that both of these commands are just a simple function, those in the associative array, and each array should has at least key that is called command, and this key represent the name of the function which is inside this namespace, like Drupal Ajax prototype command. So you have predefined few commands which Drupal ships with, but you can also make your own command. So the server will respond with the commands, and that is actually an array, and array has the command key which represent the name of the function and the data which is going to be passed to that function. So I'll show you that how you can attach the Ajax behavior to a field. So this is like attaching behavior to a field. So when user interact with that field, it's going to trigger the Ajax request. Okay, so Drupal gives you a 3 way of attaching the Ajax request to any element. Okay, so simplest way is add the useAjax class to any anchor tag. So if you have any anchor tag on a page, and if it has a useAjax class, then when user click on that link, it's going to load, it's going to make a request by Ajax on that href of that anchor tag. So on that path, it's going to actually make the Ajax request rather than following that path. Okay, and if it's a form button, then you can add a class called useAjax submit on that form button. Then Drupal is going to submit that form with the Ajax. It's going to take all the form data and serialize it and then make a request. And the request is going to be made on the action attribute of that form. Okay, and the third and the most preferable way of attaching Ajax behavior to any field or any element on a page is that use the Ajax render item, which has a couple of options. And the most common option is like callback and a wrapper, which I'm going to show. So these are the easiest way to attach Ajax behavior to any of the field on the page. Okay, so here's the example that I'm using the UsersX class on the anchor tag. So here's the simply I'm creating a render item like link, which has a markup like click me to load via Ajax, and it has some path. And the most important thing is that I'm attaching a class called UsersX. Okay, when you use this method, you need to make sure that Drupal Ajax library is loaded on a page. Like you can load it with Drupal add library and the system Drupal.ajax, or another way is just to use the has attached render item, so that when this render is being rendered on a page, it will attach the Drupal Ajax library on page. So this library will search on the page, okay, how many elements on the page or the anchor and that has the UsersX command on it, and it's gonna bind the behavior on the click on this each of the anchor tags, so that when user click, it's gonna make a Ajax request on that part. Okay, and so another thing is that the link of that anchor tag can has the node.js in the as a part of the path. So when Drupal actually make the request, it's gonna replace this node.js path with the Ajax. So in your callback, you can easily know whether the request was made with the Ajax or it's gonna made by non-Ajax. Like if the browser does not support Ajax, then this node.js part is gonna be a node.js. It's not gonna be Ajax. So inside your callback, you can know this request is made by not as Ajax, so you can easily degrade and just respond the page, and it's going to refresh the page. So it's like degradation, a graceful degradation, so that your Ajax link does not break if browser does not support the Ajax. So this is another example of using the useAjax submit class on the form submit. So here you can see that I do have the submit button. So I attach that useAjax submit. But when you use this way of attaching Ajax behavior, you need to make sure that you have two libraries loaded on the page. One is the Drupal.ajax and another is jQuery.form, because Drupal uses jQuery form library to serialize the data and submit it. And another option is you can use the has attached method and just make sure that these two libraries are attached. And it has also the same rule that it can has the node.js as a part of the action of the form. And when the Drupal makes the Ajax request, it's going to remove this node.js as Ajax if Ajax or you can say XML HTTP request is object is supported in the browser. Otherwise, it's going to be a node.js, so you can easily degrade if request is not made by Ajax. Okay, so and the most preferable way is use the has Ajax item key as a render element. Okay, so you simply specify has Ajax, and it's going to take all the configuration required for the to attach the Ajax behavior to that element. And the most important key is that one is the callback and another is a wrapper, and the rest of them are the optional. So the callback is the PHP function which is going to be invoked when Drupal is going to make a request. It's going to invoke that function, and in that function you will get the data which is made by sent by the request. Then you can do the processing, and then you return a response. And the response is going to if you return a response like HTML, then that response is going to remove the wrapper which is on the client side. So here I'm saying that this is the ID of that element. So when I get a response, it's going to take the response and replace this the content of this ID with the response which I got. Okay, and you can specify other options like effect, event, and progress bar if you want to show the progress bar or the throw bar. And another key is the path, which is optional. If you don't specify, it's always going to use the system/Ajax. Otherwise, if you specify a path, then you need to maintain the whole cycle of the event, like define a menu item and then create a response and then deliver the response with the Ajax deliver, rather than the default is the Drupal HTML deliver. Okay, and the path can contain the nodes as any of the part of the URL, and Drupal is going to remove that with the Ajax. So this is the server-side response with Ajax code. So here you can see that I'm specifying the callback of this one is going to be Ajax response callback here, and on the client side, on the server side, it is that this function, and it is going to be called when Ajax request is made. And inside you can access the request data, and then do processing like make a request to DB and prepare your data, whatever you want to do. And then when you're responding, you can use this Ajax command. Like, so these are the Ajax commands. So one is the Ajax command append and replace. So these are the two examples, and there are plenty of them like append, prepend, CSS settings, and few more. So what I'm doing this, I'm just giving that this is the selector which should be replaced, to which to append, and the stuff or the data which should be appended. And another is the replace. So it's when Drupal get and the client get the browser get the response, is going to replace this wrapper with the content which I get from the server. So you can create as many commands as you want, and then just return it as an array. And so here's the example, the same example which I shown in the previous slides. Like, so this is the append example, is simply returning array, and this insert is actually a name of the JavaScript function which is going to be invoked when client receives the data. So as a summary, so steps to use Ajax commands. So you simply attach the Ajax behavior to element using any of the three ways, and then make sure that Ajax library is attached on a page, and then define a callback and a server, and then do your processing when you get the data and return the Ajax command. So that's the whole process of that. So you don't need to worry about creating a JSON object manually. You just create an array of your data which you want to send and pass it to command, and it will just take care of your invoking the correct function on the client side. So this is the whole cycle of the Ajax framework, and Drupal 8 follows the same thing. It uses the same methodology, like you simply create a attach Ajax behavior to any element, and then it's going to invoke a callback function inside the server side, and then you prepare a response and then send it a response. So difference is that in the Drupal 8, the client side, all the commands are moved in like new namespace like Drupal.ajax command prototype. So which in the Drupal 7, those were in Drupal Ajax prototype commands. So now all these commands, so each of the command is a function inside this namespace, and the same, it's going to take three arguments. And on the server side, it's the same way of attaching the or responding to the Ajax request. So but there's a subtle difference in that. So Ajax command are the PHP objects inside the server side that simply implement this class like Drupal core Ajax command interface. So in the Drupal 7, those were simple function, those return the array which has the command key which represent the function in the JavaScript. But inside the Drupal is actually a class which actually implement interface called command interface, and when any of the class implement this interface, the only requirement is that it should implement a render method, and that render method is going to return an array which has the command key. That command key actually represents the JavaScript function which is going to invoke when the client receives the response. Okay, so it's going to implement the render method and should return a key array with the command key, and it's going to invoke the function, the name of the command key representing. So as a summary, the steps to use Ajax command in the Drupal 8. So you simply attach a Ajax behavior to any of the DOM element, and then you make sure that Ajax library are loaded on a page. Then you define a simple route, and then define a controller or a method or a form. And then inside you're gonna create a Ajax response. So this is the Ajax response which is provided Drupal core Ajax. You're gonna create this object, and this object has a method called add command, and on that add command you're gonna return your command. So Drupal 8 provide lots of existing commands, like those are each of them is the implementation of command interface like HTML command, CSS command, append command, prepend command. So you can use those commands, or you can create your own custom command. In most of the cases those commands are enough, but sometimes you want to create your own command, which I'll show you how you can create that one. So that's the enough talk. So I think it's the time to see the code, and you should be interested in seeing the code, because just telling that how to make a request and this how to respond is not enough. So let's create a custom Ajax command in Drupal 8. So I have set up a Drupal 8 module which simply implement a custom Ajax command which you can. So here's the GitHub repo, but I'll show you code in my computer. So here's the simple Drupal 8 module which is I created. So here you can see I am defining, this is the info file, and here's the routing file. So in the routing you can see that I'm defining two routes. So one is the simple event page which is going to display page. It's simply a controller which is responding to the content. So, and another is the method which is actually going to invoked when Ajax request is made. It's going to create a Ajax response and then respond it back. Okay, so I do have these two methods in my controller. And another thing is that I simply defined a theme hook like event page. It's going to take some variables and split it out with the template. So this is my template. Is it enough? As the fonts are big enough? Or I can change the size of the fonts. Oops. Sorry. Yeah. So this template is simply just returning a title and just spitting out few of the variables. Okay, so by default it's the empty divs. And I defined a library, a custom library, like it's simply returning defining a custom function inside the namespace for Drupal Ajax command and the prototype. So this is the custom function which I'm creating in this namespace. So what it's doing is when it's get a response, it's gonna take these three fields and remove the content with the response which is getting from the response. Okay, so this is the function which is gonna be invoked when client get a response for the server. So inside my source directory, I do have this controller which simply has this event page which simply returning the calling the theme function. Is not passing any data because I'm going to load the data with the Ajax request, and I make sure that I'm making sure that library attached, the library which I just defined it should be attached with the page. And this is my callback when the Ajax request is made. When I click on a button, this is going to be called. So here you can see I'm just defining a object which you can do, which you can make it a DB query or whatever you want to do, or just make a request to a third-party service and create your data which you want to respond back. And then here you can see that I'm just creating a Ajax response object, and then this object has a method called add commands, and you can respond with your commands. So here I'm defining the custom commands, but in most of the cases you can respond with the existing command like HTML command and CSS command. These all the classes which are already provided. Okay, so let's have a look at this custom command which I defined. So inside the Ajax folder here I defined this command. So only thing which this class is doing is it is implementing this command interface which is from the Drupal core Ajax command interface. And when you implement this interface, the only requirement is that your class should implement a method called render, and this class should return an array which has a key command, and this command key represents the name of the function which is defined inside the scope of this JS object, Drupal Ajax prototype, and this is your command name. So this name should match with the key of the response which your render method is returning here, and it's going to take the response. Okay, so I'll just show you how you can do that. So oops, I'll show you my demo. So here you can see that, oops. So I defined simply a page like event link. So when you click on, this is the page which is the event router which I defined. So it's returning a response, DrupalSouth offline, and this is the link. So click here to load event details. So when I click it, it's going to make a request to my controller here. It's going to make a request to my controller, and it's going to create a data. So for now I'm just creating the hard-coded data here, and then making a request, and then creating the object of my custom command, and then passing this data. Okay, so when I click it, it's going to make a request and it's going to load the data. And so in this case I don't need actually my custom command, I just did it for the demo purpose, but because it should be enough with the HTML command or prepend command which Drupal 8 already provide. But in some complex scenario you may want to create a custom command, like let's say you want to do something, lots of things on a page when Ajax response comes, then you can define your custom command and do all the heavy work in your custom command, and then you can use that command anywhere in your application, or you can even extend this command class and then modify whatever you want to modify. So that's all for the Ajax command. So here's the code on the GitHub. If you want to check out, you can check it out. So any question?
Can you just go back to that GitHub page for 1 second?
This one?
Yeah, thanks, mate.
Yep. Yep. I can show you the repo. I think I should have it. Yep.
When you're using like just the fast use Ajax and the link,
Mm-hmm.
is there a wrapper where does the new content get populated to? Just add that class to the link.
All right. So you want to know that what is the wrapper where it is injecting the content which is getting from the server, right? All right. So if I show you in the code, so this is my template right now. When I simply made a request to my controller initially, so here's my controller. So I made a request to this controller. It is going to call, and simply calling this theme function event page, and it is calling this template here, and it's simply spitting out this content on the page, right? So if I go to the page and inspect it and refresh the page, so let's say this is the refreshed page, and if I inspect and show you that only thing which it is displaying is that, is it big enough?
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't actually that one. I think it was in your early example you said you could just add the class use Ajax
Yes,
link,
yes,
and that makes it an Ajax link.
yes,
If you just were to add that class,
yes.
where would it inject the content?
That you need to implement. So it's going to make the request to the href of that link,
Yep.
okay, and you need to implement that menu hook,
Yep.
okay, and in that your callback function you need to, because you're going to get the data from the request, you can extract all the data from the Ajax request and then prepare your response, and then you need to respond with the Ajax command. So each Ajax command is like, if I show you in the slide, so in case of Drupal 7, so you're going to respond it like this: Ajax command and the selector and the data which you made, however. Okay, so this command tells that when you get the response, what should we do? It should append or it should respond, and this is the selector where it's going to be append or depend. So this selector you can get the from the Ajax request which you got. Yeah. Any more questions? Sorry, I'm not able to see you. Yep.
Do you have a recommended amount of data, like in terms of size, that you can pull using this Ajax? For example, if I wanted to generate like a table with hundreds of lines of records,
Mm-hmm.
for some reason, do you have like a recommended size of information that you pull?
It
And
also
do you store
depends.
that in like the browser storage, for example? How would you handle that?
Yeah, so by default the browser storage supports, like local storage only supports the 5 MB I think in the browser, but it's good to do the making, if you want to load lots of data, then make a multiple Ajax request like in the chunks. So let's say you have the table or you have the data and you want to load all the data, then rather than loading all the data, because when the browser is going to get the response, it's going to invoke the JavaScript function which is going to make your page stuck for a moment if JavaScript is taking too much time, right? So you need to make a request in a chunks, like load only 20 result or the 100 results in a one is in a request, and then append those requests and then make another Ajax request. So that way you can load any amount of data if you want.
Sorry, and a follow-up one. Have you had any experience where you had to pull a lot of data, like Polynesian names have a lot of apostrophes in the names, and how would you handle that for the browser storage? Sometimes it can throw errors
Mm-hmm.
because of the apostrophes in the names. Have you had any issues working with that, and how you move that within the browser storage, local storage?
I never faced that issue, but I think you can implement your exception handling mechanism, which can just simply provide some kind of fallback. So like say if you are not able to store the data in your local storage, then you should uh, implement some sort of defense mechanism for that. But I never faced that issue. Yeah, because I never had a requirement where I need to store a lot of data inside the local storage. Any questions? All right, thank you guys.